Also in the UK, King Charles III has made his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. The title was last held by their father, Prince Philip, from 1947 until his death in 2021.
A woman walked into Buckingham Palace on Sunday night and silently told the world that she was already in charge. No speech, no press conference, no announcement of any kind. Just a single piece of jewelry pinned to her chest, and every person in that room immediately understood what it meant. What happened next, inside the next 48 hours, has triggered the most dangerous constitutional confrontation this family has faced since 1936. And the man who has just delivered what sources are calling a legal killing blow to Queen Camilla's future is a prince who most people had already forgotten existed. Stay with me, because when I tell you what Prince Edward allegedly did before sunrise this week, you will understand why senior figures inside Whitehall are now using only one phrase to describe what is coming. They are calling it irreversible. Sunday evening, April 26th, the state dining room of Buckingham Palace. The chandeliers, those magnificent cascading rivers of crystal that have illuminated the faces of presidents, prime ministers, and foreign heads of state for generations, had been deliberately dimmed, not due to a fault, not due to any technical oversight. Reports suggest the instruction came directly from the office of the Prince of Wales, delivered in language about energy conservation, but understood by every person in that room as something far more pointed. It was a calculated dimming of grandeur. And into that deliberately muted golden light, Queen Camilla walked wearing something that, according to palace insiders, stopped conversations mid-sentence at multiple tables simultaneously. The Tudor crown brooch. If you don't know what that means, you are about to. This is not simply a beautiful piece of jewelry. It is not a family heirloom worn for sentimental reasons. The Tudor crown brooch is the physical embodiment of King Charles's personal royal cipher, his sovereign signature rendered in silver, rubies, emeralds and sapphires, and housed in a high-security vault at Garrard under protocols that govern its release with the same legal weight as a state document. With the king reportedly confined to his private apartments under a carefully managed veil of medical discretion, sources inside the palace are now stating plainly, Camilla wearing that brooch was not a fashion choice, it was a declaration. A senior courtier was overheard near the sideboard telling a colleague that she was no longer waiting for a transition. She was, in their words, already executing it. But the most powerful statement in that room Sunday night was not what Queen Camilla was wearing, it was what Prince Edward was not. In senior royal circles, a formal occasion demands a chest heavy with medals, orders and ribbons. This is not optional. It is not a preference. It is institutional armor, a visual biography stitched in gold thread that communicates rank, loyalty and legitimacy in a single glance. Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, arrived in a plain black suit. No medals, no orders, no insignia of any kind. Just an immaculate, deliberate emptiness where his honors should have been. When a senior equerry reportedly approached him and asked whether the Duke had perhaps forgotten his decorations, witnesses describe his response as arriving like a cold blade. He allegedly said, "A man only displays his honors for a leadership he still recognizes." If that quote is accurate, and multiple independent palace sources are now confirming it is, that is arguably the most significant act of public royal defiance since the abdication crisis of 1936. Not because of what it said, because of who said it, where he said it, and what he had already been doing for 5 years before he said it. To understand what is happening right now, you cannot start on Sunday evening. You have to go back to April 9th, 2021, because this is not a spontaneous explosion of family tension. This is the culmination of a strategy that has been assembled, brick by quiet brick, across the better part of 5 years. When Prince Philip died, every outlet in the world focused on the grief of a 99-year-old widow, but behind the closed doors of the royal household, something structural had shifted. Philip had been, by most informed accounts, the quiet architect of Edward's position within the family, his youngest son, his protected project. With Philip gone, Edward faced a choice that history rarely offers twice: retreat into permanent irrelevance, or build something that no one would see coming until it was already finished. He chose to build. What followed is what people close to the family began quietly calling the strategy of absolute reliability. Edward became the royal who never generated a damaging headline, never triggered a crisis, and never failed to show up wherever the institution needed a body and a face that wouldn't cause problems. It was unglamorous work, it was methodical, and it was, reportedly, one of the most strategically sophisticated positioning efforts any member of this family has executed in modern history. By March of 2023, the strategy had produced its first major dividend. King Charles formally bestowed upon Edward the title of Duke of Edinburgh, the precise title Philip had carried for decades. Sources insist this was not sentiment. In the legal and constitutional architecture of the palace, that dukedom carries with it a permanent seat at the highest deliberative tables of the family. Edward was no longer a footnote in the royal narrative. He was suddenly a peer of the king and of the Prince of Wales. Then came the announcement that changed the physics of everything. February 2024, King Charles publicly announced his cancer diagnosis. As the king withdrew from public life for treatment, a vacuum opened at the centre of the British monarchy, the kind of vacuum that the history of this family suggests is never left empty for long. Camilla moved to fill it. She did so visibly, taking on a rapid succession of high-profile solo engagements and positioning herself as the working face of the crown. In the battle for the cameras, she was winning, but sources suggest that in the battle for the family, she was quietly hemorrhaging ground she didn't even realize was beneath her feet. The resentment reportedly crystallized in April of 2024 when the King's Honours List was released. Edward and Sophie had by that point been carrying an extraordinary share of the royal workload, appearing at engagements, representing the crown at events Camilla declined, and doing so without complaint or theatre. They were absent from the Honours List entirely. The atmosphere inside their private office that week, insiders say, was nothing short of nuclear. The widely circulating suspicion inside palace circles was that Camilla's inner circle had quietly engineered those exclusions to ensure she remained the unchallenged centre of gravity in the king's reign. Edward's response was not anger, it was patience, cold, deliberate, strategic patience. And then came Prince Andrew. On February 19, 2026, the Duke of York was effectively removed from Royal Lodge and relocated to Wood Farm at Sandringham in what sources describe as a logistically delicate and tightly controlled operation. The entire affair, one of the most sensitive internal royal manoeuvres in recent years, involving legal instruments, security coordination, and the kind of discretion that, if mishandled, would have generated global headlines for weeks, was overseen on the ground not by a lawyer, not by a palace aide, not by a senior courtier. It was overseen by Edward. He managed the operation without a single embarrassing leak. Not one story broke that wasn't fully contained. And in doing so, he reportedly communicated something to the family and to the government that no public speech or medal ceremony ever could have conveyed. He was the one you called when the institution itself needed saving. That reputation became visible to everyone at Easter Sunday service, April 5, 2026, at St. George's Chapel in Windsor. According to those present, the seating that day functioned as a precise map of where the real alliances now stood. Edward and his sons were positioned shoulder to shoulder with William and the Wales family. Camilla was physically separated, flanked only by her own retinue, distanced from the central formation of the family. No official explanation was offered. None was needed. The photograph said everything. 2 days before Sunday's events on Friday, April 25th, reports began circulating that a YouGov internal briefing had reached key figures inside both the palace and Whitehall. The data, described by those who saw it as structurally alarming, reportedly placed Camilla's overall favourability at approximately 42%. Among British adults under 35, the generation that will determine whether this institution survives into the next century, her trust rating had reportedly fallen to 28%. 38 months ago, that same figure was above 50. This is not a slow decline, this is a collapse. In palace-adjacent circles, 40% is the informal threshold below which the Public Accounts Committee can legitimately begin formal questioning of taxpayer expenditure on a senior royal staff, travel and security, and reports are now suggesting that a group of MPs are actively preparing to invoke exactly that scrutiny in the parliamentary session scheduled for June. One senior official, speaking in a closed meeting, allegedly framed it without ambiguity. If the public has stopped buying the product, one must question why the taxpayer is still funding the marketing. The financial architecture of the monarchy, in other words, may now be preparing to move against Camilla before any constitutional mechanism is even required to. Now return to that brooch, because what it allegedly represents goes far beyond symbolism. According to sources familiar with the crown's jewellery protocols, the Tudor crown brooch does not leave its vault at Garrard without a specific and legally defined authorization process, a process that carries the same institutional weight as accessing a state document during a sensitive period. Reports now claim that the brooch was signed out on Friday afternoon using what is described as a temporary emergency authorization mechanism, the kind of instrument reserved exclusively for state funerals or sudden coronations, and that it was reportedly processed without the king's direct personal sign-off. If that is accurate, Camilla did not simply wear a powerful piece of jewellery to dinner. She allegedly accessed the symbolic apparatus of the sovereign through a legal side door, while the sovereign himself was indisposed and incapable of providing consent. That is not a fashion statement, that is a provocation, and it reportedly triggered a response that arrived before dawn. At 23:15 on Sunday night, a single unescorted black Jaguar was observed leaving Kensington Palace and travelling at speed toward Windsor Great Park, not toward central London, not toward Royal Lodge, toward Prince Edward. Reports now claim that William and Edward remained in conversation until the early hours of Monday morning. This is what insiders are now referring to as the formation of the Regency Alliance, and the consequences reportedly became visible within hours. By Monday morning, reports emerged that Camilla had, over the weekend, attempted to exercise what is described as a rare invocation of royal prerogative, seeking to appoint 3 personal advisors to the board of the Crown Estate, the multi-billion-pound property portfolio that underpins the entire financial existence of the British monarchy. The alleged purpose, according to multiple sources, was to embed her own influence into the institution's asset structure ahead of any transition of power. The attempt was reportedly blocked before the end of business Monday. The mechanism of that blockade was Edward. Acting in his capacity as a senior trustee of the Royal Archives, he reportedly invoked clauses embedded in the late Duke of Edinburgh's private estate papers, clauses specifically constructed to prevent major administrative alterations to Crown assets during periods of sovereign incapacity. When Camilla's legal team received the formal notice, a source close to the Lord Chancellor's office described the atmosphere in the room as turning, in their words, to ice. Edward had not sent a strongly worded letter, he had sent a legal wall, and it had been built 5 years before anyone knew it would be needed. The response from Kensington Palace arrived Monday morning, and it arrived in the most characteristically royal way possible, through an absence. William's office confirmed it would not be scheduling a single joint public engagement between the Prince of Wales and Queen Camilla for the entire month of May. The press corps sought clarification. The statement they received made no mention of Camilla by name. It referred only to the Prince's commitment to the institutional stability of the future. In royal communications, where every omission is as deliberate as every word, that statement was received across palace circles as the loudest declaration anyone had made in months. The visual narrative of the monarchy is being redrawn, and the name Queen Camilla, sources suggest, is being quietly removed from its future chapters while she is still technically occupying them. 3 scenarios are now circulating among those with genuine proximity to this situation. The first, a public confrontation. Camilla refuses isolation, launches a media counter-offensive, and leverages what press relationships she still holds to redirect the narrative. Sources describe this as deeply dangerous, not only for the Queen Consort, but for the institution as a whole. The second, a prolonged Cold War, a stalemate of blocked appointments, withheld cooperation, and competing factions inside the palace walls, exactly the kind of prolonged institutional paralysis that financial markets, diplomatic partners, and constitutional lawyers find most destabilizing. The third scenario is the one that sources increasingly suggest is already being drafted. A letters patent formally appointing William as Prince Regent, granting him the full constitutional powers of the sovereign without requiring abdication. Under this arrangement, Edward would reportedly assume an operationally powerful but deliberately unofficial role overseeing the household transition, and Camilla would be moved into a Queen Dowager position, ceremonially intact, constitutionally sidelined, and functionally finished. Reports of a document bearing the royal seal and a handwritten instruction reading "Simply proceed to stage 2", reportedly observed at the Ministry of Justice on Monday morning, have done nothing to quiet the speculation. There is one final detail that, if accurate, may render everything else secondary. Every British monarch maintains a meticulously constructed operational protocol for the event of their death. For King Charles, that protocol is known as Operation Menai Bridge, a classified framework governing every notification, every access procedure, and every institutional action that follows the moment the king takes his last breath. Sources are now claiming that on Monday morning, an internal update was pushed through the Lord Chamberlain's secure systems that repositioned Queen Camilla's name on the notification and access list, placing her below Princess Anne and below Prince Edward. Read that again. The protocol governing what happens when the king dies has reportedly been restructured to deprioritize the reigning queen consort, while the king technically remains on the throne, and what was inside the red leather briefcase that Edward was reportedly observed carrying from the king's private study in the early hours of Monday morning. Whatever it contains, one thing is now undeniable. The man who spent 3 decades being the invisible Windsor, the one who never made headlines, never caused problems, never demanded attention, has, in the space of 72 hours, become the single most consequential figure inside the palace walls. He did not raise his voice, he did not call a press conference. He simply changed the locks while everyone else was still arguing about the lights. The next development in this story is already moving through the corridors of Whitehall. When it surfaces, nothing about the public face of this monarchy will look the same. This is Royal Pulse, where the truth glimmers even in the shadows.